What if I told you some of the most nerve-tightening raid movies were not born in a writer's room at all? What if the plans, the risks, the near misses were already real long before the cameras rolled? Halfway through this list, things get surprisingly honest about what movies change and why. And by the end, one famous mission flips everything you think you know about realism on screen. Stick with me, because not every true story is as true as it looks. Number 15, The Guns of Navarone, 1961. A fortress on a cliff. An impossible approach. A ticking clock. At first glance, this movie feels like pure cinematic bravado. But the spine of its story comes from real Allied commando raids across the Greek islands during the Second World War. These missions were designed to silence massive coastal defenses that controlled sea routes and trapped entire naval operations. The film takes that strategic nightmare and condenses it into a single nerve-wracking objective. The mountain scale, the rough landings, the constant fear of exposure. Those weren't just dramatic choices. They were daily realities for real units sent behind enemy lines with limited backup and even less room for error. What the movie exaggerates is speed. Real operations took weeks of planning and endless patience. But the emotional truth holds. Small teams, huge consequences. One mistake meant the entire mission collapsed before it even began. What makes this film endure is how it respects the pressure of those missions. No flashy heroics, just grim focus and problem-solving under stress. By the time the final moments arrive, you don't feel like you watched an action movie. You feel like you survived a logistical nightmare. That's why it still works. Because beneath the spectacle, the tension is honest. Number 14, Operation Crossbow, 1965. This one plays like a spy puzzle wrapped inside a raid movie. Operation Crossbow dives into a lesser-known but very real Allied effort to uncover and disrupt secret enemy projects during the Second World War. Intelligence teams were sent deep into occupied territory to verify rumors, gather proof, and quietly sabotage progress before it was too late. The film leans heavily into deception, fake identities, double meanings, conversations where every word matters. That tone comes straight from history. Real operatives often worked without knowing the full plan. They were fed fragments, not answers. Where the movie gets bold is its compression. In reality, these missions stretched across months, sometimes years. The film condenses that slow grind into a tight narrative to keep momentum high. But the core idea remains solid. Knowledge was the real prize, not territory, not headlines. What makes this entry stand out is its restraint. It understands that tension doesn't need explosions. It needs uncertainty. Who can you trust? What happens if the wrong detail slips? By the end, it leaves you uneasy. Not thrilled, uneasy. And that's exactly how the real operations felt. Number 13, The Cockleshell Heroes, 1955. This is one of those stories that sounds exaggerated until you realize it was real. The Cockleshell Heroes is based on Operation Frankton, a genuine British commando raid that relied on patience more than power. A small team traveled by canoe through enemy-controlled waters to reach a heavily guarded harbor. No noise, no backup, no second chances. The movie captures the most important truth about the mission. Silence was survival. Every paddle stroke mattered. Every delay increased risk. These men weren't racing the clock. They were negotiating with it. Real accounts describe exhaustion, freezing water, and constant fear of discovery. What the film does well is restraint. It avoids spectacle and focuses on endurance. The danger doesn't come from chaos. It comes from waiting too long in the wrong place. That slow pressure is exactly what defined the real operation. Historically, the impact was significant. Even with heavy losses, the raid forced the enemy to divert resources and rethink harbor security. A small team created a big reaction. This isn't a story about triumph. It's about resolve. And that honesty is why the film still holds weight decades later. Number 12, The Bridge at Remagen, 1969. This film is built around a real moment where speed mattered more than perfection. The Bridge at Remagen tells the story of Allied forces racing to capture the last intact bridge across the Rhine. It wasn't a carefully staged plan. It was an opportunity spotted at the last possible second. That's what makes it a true commando-style story. Decisions were made under pressure, with incomplete information and no guarantee of support. If the bridge fell, the chance was gone. If they moved too slowly, history would change. The movie reflects that urgency well. Conflicting orders, confused leadership, units acting on instinct rather than instruction. That tension is historically accurate. The real event was chaotic, not elegant. What gets overlooked is how risky the decision was. Commanders knew the structure could collapse at any moment, yet they moved anyway. That willingness to act fast shaped the final phase of the war in Europe. The film doesn't romanticize the moment. It shows confusion, hesitation, and fear, and that's why it belongs here. This wasn't a perfect raid. It was a necessary one. Number 11, The Longest Day, 1962. This isn't just a movie. It's a mosaic of real moments. The Longest Day recreates the largest coordinated raid operation in history, focusing on dozens of small missions that unfolded simultaneously during the opening of the Western Front. While often remembered for its scale, the film's power lies in the details. Small teams landing in the wrong places, messengers running through chaos, commanders improvising plans on the fly. These were real problems faced by real people. No single hero could control events. Success depended on thousands of individual decisions made under pressure. The film avoids flashy dramatics and leans into perspective. You see confusion, delay, miscommunication, and that's exactly what historical accounts describe. What makes this entry essential is its humility. It doesn't pretend everything went according to plan. It shows how fragile coordination really is when reality hits. By the end, you don't remember one character. You remember the weight of the operation itself. And that may be the most truthful approach of all. Number 10, The Great Escape, 1963. A breakout so audacious it sounds invented, except it wasn't. This story pulls directly from one of the most ambitious prisoner breakouts of the Second World War. Hundreds of Allied captives coordinated in secret, digging tunnels, forging papers, and mapping routes under constant supervision. The movie smooths the edges, but the core facts remain astonishing. What the film captures best is patience. Real planning stretched over months. Every small success mattered. A stolen tool, a copied document, a whispered signal at the right moment. Failure didn't come with drama. It came quietly, often before anyone realized something had gone wrong. The movie simplifies consequences and compresses timelines, but the emotional rhythm is accurate. Hope rises, tension tightens, and reality closes in fast. This wasn't about bravery in combat. It was about endurance under pressure. That's why the story still resonates. It proves that resistance doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like waiting, planning, and daring to try anyway. Number 9, The Bridge on the River Quai, 1957. This isn't a raid movie in the traditional sense. It's a slow-motion collision. Based on real prisoner labor projects in Southeast Asia, the film explores how strategy, pride, and pressure can distort judgment over time. While the story dramatizes personalities, the underlying dilemma is real. Occupying forces demanded infrastructure. Captives were forced into impossible choices: resist openly and risk punishment, cooperate and risk becoming part of the problem. The eventual act of sabotage reflects real late-stage Allied efforts to disrupt supply lines quietly and decisively. Timing mattered more than spectacle. One precise action could undo months of forced work. What makes this film powerful is how it reframes heroism. It's not about who acts fastest. It's about who realizes the truth before it's too late. That moral tension elevates it beyond spectacle. It becomes a study of control, compromise, and consequence. Number 8, Force 10 from Navarone, 1978. Returning to familiar ground but with sharper edges, this sequel draws inspiration from real follow-up raids conducted to secure intelligence and prevent enemy regrouping after initial successes. Historically, many early victories required immediate reinforcement. Leave too soon, and control vanished. Stay too long, and teams risked exposure. The film leans into that dilemma. While characters feel larger than life, the mission logic tracks closely with historical accounts. Secondary raids often carried higher risk than the first. Surprise was gone, defenses adapted. What the movie exaggerates is scale, but it respects momentum. Every delay matters, every misstep compounds. It's a reminder that real operations didn't end with one victory. They demanded sustained pressure, and that's where many stories quietly disappear. Number 7, The Dam Busters, 1955. Precision over chaos, planning over panic. This film is grounded in one of the most technically daring missions of the war. A carefully designed strike aimed to cripple key infrastructure using timing, altitude, and near-perfect coordination. What makes the story remarkable is how much depended on calculation rather than force. Crews practiced endlessly. One mistake meant failure. There was no room for improvisation. The movie stays surprisingly faithful to that reality. It avoids exaggeration and focuses on process. Trial runs, adjustments, quiet confidence built from repetition. That restraint gives it power. You feel the weight of preparation, and when execution finally comes, it feels earned. This isn't a thrill ride, it's a demonstration of discipline, and that's why it remains one of the most respected portrayals of strategic action ever filmed. Number 6, Above Us the Waves, 1955. This is a story about precision taken to its extreme. Above Us, The Waves is based on real underwater commando missions carried out by British teams using human-guided devices to reach enemy ships in defended harbors. These were operations where planning mattered more than strength. The film focuses heavily on preparation. Training scenes aren't filler. They're the point. Real participants spent months practicing movements that allowed no mistakes. One error meant detection. Detection meant failure. What makes this film remarkable is how calm it feels. That calm mirrors reality. Panic had no place in these missions. Everything depended on control, breath, timing, stillness. Historically, these operations forced major changes in naval defense strategy. Harbors that once felt secure no longer were. The psychological effect matched the physical damage. The movie avoids exaggeration and trusts the material. It understands that real tension comes from restraint, from knowing how much is at stake and having no way to rush. That respect for process is why this film stands out. It shows how quiet operations could shake powerful systems. Number 5, Raid on Rommel, 1971. This mission unfolds in the desert, where mistakes echo forever. Raid on Rommel draws directly from real Allied surprise attacks, carried out deep behind enemy lines in North Africa. These raids were fast, dangerous, and designed to strike leadership and supply points before vanishing back into the open terrain. The film captures the isolation perfectly. No forests to hide in, no cities to blend into, just sand, heat, and distance. Real units faced the same problem. Once discovered, escape became harder with every passing minute. What the movie gets right is urgency. Desert raids were never about holding ground. They were about disruption. Hit quickly. Leave confusion behind. Force the opponent to rethink their entire defensive posture. The film simplifies planning, but it respects consequences. Every delay increases danger. Every wrong turn costs momentum. That tension mirrors real after-action reports from the period. By the end, this doesn't feel like a victory lap. It feels like survival. And that honesty is why it deserves a place on this list. Number 4, Attack on the Iron Coast, 1968. This film recreates one of the most daring raids of the entire war. Attack on the Iron Coast dramatizes Operation Chariot, the real Allied assault on the Saint-Nazaire dry dock. The objective was simple to describe and terrifying to attempt: disable a structure vital to enemy naval power. The plan relied on deception, timing, and sacrifice. A small force sailed directly into a defended port, knowing escape was unlikely. The film doesn't hide that risk. It leans into it. What it gets right is the sense of commitment. Once the mission began, turning back wasn't an option. Every step forward closed another door behind them. That's exactly how the real raid unfolded. Historically, the operation succeeded beyond expectations. The dry dock was rendered unusable for the rest of the war. A single night changed naval strategy across an entire region. The movie balances action with consequence. It doesn't treat the raid as spectacle, it treats it as decision. And that's why it earns its place. Number 3, Operation Daybreak, 1975. This story is quiet, tense, and devastatingly real. Operation Daybreak recounts the real assassination of a high-ranking official in occupied Europe. The mission required months of planning, local support, and absolute commitment. What the film does brilliantly is show the aftermath. Success did not end the story. It multiplied consequences. Reprisals followed. Entire communities suffered. The movie refuses to glorify the act. Instead, it examines responsibility. Every choice carries weight beyond the mission itself. Historically, this operation stands as one of the most effective and morally complex raids of the war. The film respects that complexity without simplifying it. That honesty makes it uncomfortable, and that discomfort is exactly why it matters. Number 2, The Heroes of Telemark, 1965. A frozen landscape hides one of the most important raids of the war. This film dramatizes real sabotage missions carried out in Norway to halt a critical enemy program. These raids were small, slow, and incredibly dangerous. Teams traveled on skis, communication was minimal, supplies were limited, failure meant capture or worse. The movie stays close to reality. It emphasizes patience, local resistance, and the brutal environment. There are no shortcuts, just endurance. What makes this mission legendary is impact. A small group delayed progress for years and altered strategic outcomes far beyond the region. That's the power of precision, and this film understands it deeply. Number 1, The Silent Enemy, 1958. This is the closest cinema ever came to filming a real commando raid without Hollywood distortion. The Silent Enemy is based directly on British underwater operations against enemy ships during the Second World War. These missions relied on patience, stealth, and timing rather than spectacle. Teams worked at night, in silence, with no margin for error. What makes this film extraordinary is its restraint. No inflated hero moments, no rushed pacing, just careful preparation and quiet execution. Real veterans were consulted, and the procedures shown reflect actual methods used at the time. The tension comes from stillness, not chaos, and that's exactly how the real missions worked. This isn't inspired by history, it is history, translated to screen with unusual discipline. That's why it earns the top spot. The 4 movies that did not actually happen. The Eagle Has Landed, 1976. This movie feels real because it behaves like reality. The planning is careful, the movement is slow. The tension comes from silence, not spectacle. That's why so many viewers still assume the mission really happened, but it didn't. There was no successful airborne raid of this kind on British soil. What was real were the fears behind it. Allied planners genuinely worried about surprise landings and internal disruption. The film borrows that anxiety and builds a believable scenario around it. It's fiction powered by authentic thinking, which makes it dangerously convincing. Where Eagles Dare, 1968. This one looks grounded, but it stretches reality in key places. High-altitude infiltration, fortress extraction, layered deception. All inspired by real concepts, but never executed this way. The movie works because it understands pressure, cold, isolation, doubt inside the team. That part is honest. What isn't is the scale and precision. Real missions were slower and far less clean. Still, it earns respect by showing how fragile trust becomes under stress. It's not history, it's a thought experiment built from historical logic. The Dirty Dozen, 1967. No such mission ever took place, but the idea behind it absolutely existed. Military planners did consider unconventional operatives for extreme tasks. The film exaggerates personalities and outcomes for dramatic punch, turning a serious concept into something bold and provocative. The truth is simpler and quieter. Real teams relied on discipline, not chaos. Still, the movie captures a genuine tension between authority and adaptability. That's why it feels rooted in reality even when the event itself is invented. It's not factual, but it understands the mindset. Kelly's Heroes, 1970. This story never happened, but its logic feels familiar. Front lines were fluid. Information was incomplete. Independent decisions happened more often than official records admit. The movie turns that uncertainty into humor, which separates it from history. Real missions carried heavy consequences, not punchlines. Yet the central idea holds. Opportunity sometimes appeared suddenly, and choices had to be made fast. That's why the film works. It exaggerates tone, not behavior. Fictional event, real instincts. So now you know the difference. Some raids were carved straight from history. Others were built from the fear of what could have happened. And that line is thinner than most movies admit. Which one fooled you the longest? Drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who loves war films, and hit subscribe if you want stories where truth and cinema collide. Because sometimes the most believable missions are the ones that never existed at all.